Turkovic received her Master of Fine Arts from Goldsmiths College-University of London in curatorial studies and a Bachelor of Fine Arts from our very own Webster University. She has organized exhibitions in Athens, Greece, Los Angeles, New York, London, and Oxford, and in St. Louis at the Contemporary Art Museum and White Flag Projects. Turkovic has been curator at Laumeier Sculpture Park since 2011. During her tenure there, she's overseen acquisitions and commissions by many notable artists. Recent projects at the park include Hugh Hayden, American Vernacular, Yayoi Kusama, Narcissus Garden, and a current performance project with artist Monika Weiss. As curator, she develops and organizes exhibitions and related programming with the park's gallery and artists in residence, as well as oversees the collection of 70+ monumental scale artworks in the 105-acre park. Please join me in giving her a warm welcome.
Hey, thanks. Thanks everybody for coming today. Should we, maybe give it a couple minutes and we'll shut the doors, just because there may be.
You can turn the light over you off too if you want it. That's the wrong one.
Okay, I don't know which one is it.
Do you want it off?
No, we're all right. Okay, so I'd like to begin this lecture. Thanks again, everyone, for coming, and thank you, Lindsay, for that very nice introduction. So, as Lindsay said, I am a graduate of Webster University. I was a BFA in painting, though, but I want to premise the lecture today with the fact that I didn't know I was a curator when I was painting. It took me a while to go back and look at my paintings and say, I was actually curating objects on a canvas, and I just hadn't figured out how to be a curator yet. I was a painter, I was trying to communicate that idea just in a slightly different way, in a different medium, and in a different platform. So all those ideas were there yet. They were already there, but I just hadn't figured out what mode they were going to take yet. Because I don't think I really knew what a curator was at that moment. Still young, probably most of your age out there in the audience. So just still trying to figure it out, right? Didn't have all the answers, just was enjoying painting. So I like to begin this by saying that I approach curating in a particular way. This is more connected to as a creative curator, as an artist turned curator. These are the ideas that I think about. They don't necessarily apply in the context of Laumeier Sculpture Park, although I think I'm always approaching projects with a creative lens rather than, I wouldn't say not an academic lens, but not so didactic that I'm just putting pieces together. I'm always looking at the experience and the interpretation. So I personally approach curating as an architecture of situations and an exploration of and balance between the private and the public. And you'll see it when I show some of the previous projects I've done. It'll be very clear that I'm thinking about these things. So I think about exhibitions as a collection of objects within an object which opens to another object containing similar objects. So I like to use this Russian doll or Matryoshka model to say that it's always kind of opening up to a new thing, and I can interpret things in new ways, and maybe that object I can then interpret that in new ways. So I always see that it's opening multiple layers. The very first influence that I had, and I think the moment that I was like, okay, something clicked for me, and it was when I did the study abroad in Vienna, and I guess I was a junior turning senior. I went in the spring semester, went to Vienna, did the study abroad, and I went to the Museum of Applied Arts in Vienna, and it really struck me how the curators presented or organized their exhibition spaces. Again, not so didactic that you're just looking at objects, right? And there's interpretive material or some text there kind of telling you what it is. Here, they actually engaged with artists and had artists come in and rethink the collection and present it in a way that would make you look at it a little bit differently. So I loved that they were kind of playing with objects a little bit, but engaging artists in that conversation. So just a little bit of my bio. So when I graduated here, I started working at what was the Forum for Contemporary Art at the time. Now it's turned to Contemporary Art Museum, but I was basically the graphic designer, gallery assistant, kind of office manager, kind of doing all of that. So I leaned into the graphic design bit of my experience. And then from there, I wanted to move out to LA because some other graduates of Webster previous to me moved out to LA as well. And I was like, hey, I'm gonna follow the dream, I'm gonna go out to LA myself. Well, luckily for me, I ended up getting a position at the Hammer Museum at UCLA. And again, during my 4.5 years, there were many, many exhibitions. They have a permanent collection, but they also do changing exhibitions of mostly contemporary art. And a lot of times, LA-based contemporary artists. But in this case, this is one of the more memorable exhibitions for me. They engaged with a collaborative low-tech to design the exhibition. And they it was just video art, basically. And they turned what was just, a collection of video artwork into an experience. So they created these rooms. You just see the back side of those rooms right there. But there were these singular rooms where you could go in and then view the work. And then on the opposite end of that, there was this long hallway of more video art. And on the wall there, on that bottom image, that's actually like a pool float. And they inverted the pool float so you could lean up against it and put the headphones on. So this is a very influential exhibition for me because it was this kind of, I guess it was a public exhibition, but had this private experience as part of it, where you could put the headphones on and just view. And you'll see that influence come again. So while I was the senior designer at the Hammer Museum, I was just looking for ways to try to be a curator, right? I was working with a lot of curators. I was designing the brochures, all the signage, the banners you would see out in the city, all the public signage, and all the internal graphics as well for the museum. I'd work with other bigger designers on larger projects, like bigger catalogs. So it was a very influential time for me, but I was like, I don't know if I want to do this. I think maybe I want to be a curator. So I started doing all these independent projects. Well, I didn't make great money there. It was okay, but not enough for me to just have my own gallery space. So one idea I had was I'm going to do exhibitions of my friends' work in my office. So this is my office at the Hammer, and I would change out the exhibitions. And the idea was if somebody wanted to come see the show, I would bring them into my office, and I would do those openings during the openings of the other exhibitions at the Hammer. So I'd change them out every, few times a year. And it also gave a platform for those artists when I knew that other curators and artists were coming into my office. So I said, okay, I'm gonna go do this curating thing. And there were only a few curating programs at that time. There was the one at Goldsmiths that I did, another one at Royal College of Art in the UK, and then one here at Bard College, and a few museum studies programs that were happening at the time, but very few looking at curating as a creative practice. So I did the degree at Goldsmiths because I was, the one thing I really liked about Goldsmiths, it felt like Webster in London to me. And it was almost like I was trying to recreate that experience of Webster in a different city. And it really, there's so many similarities in that, in the university there. It's small. It was a smaller kind of liberal arts college. But a lot of really great musicians went there, like some of the band members from Blur went there, just a lot of people that I thought were really cool went to school there. So I wanted to go to school there too. So during that time, and the students in my professional practice class will know this, we were required to do these external tutorials. And I think there was a lot of things behind that, but the main thing was to begin that network that you're gonna need to build your profession. And so I reached out to Gavin Wade, who was working with another group of curators on this project called Curating Degree Zero Archive. And they would work with designers on designing ways to house these books, basically. A lot of books on curating, art history, whatever, but it was this group of curators, but also, it was just a bunch of books that would just move around the world, right? And they would have a different presentation of that wherever it went. So these are the 4 different places that archive had been, and you can see how they interpret it in the context by which they presented those same books. So I really like that idea where it's just boxes of books and they find ways to present them. And they work with designers to figure out different ways to engage with that material. This is a little bit out of sync here, but I'm gonna go with this one. So this project, Jeffrey Hughes and I, Dr. Hughes and I co-curated.
He was.
Oh, I know. So I think this deserves a little bit of backstory, just to kind of put in context, like why we would have done an exhibition like this here at that time. So for me personally, I have a connection to that part of the world, to the former Yugoslavia. My father is from Montenegro in the former Yugoslavia and was a refugee through Albania. And I was very interested in the story of, there was a lot happening in the war in the late 90s and things like that. And then we have such a large population of Bosnian and now multi-generational Bosnian from immigrant families from that area for different reasons and from different sides of that story. So I was personally interested in this and just having a connection to this Balkan identity and thinking this is really important. We really need to do an exhibition that connects with this, this new group of our community. So Jeff and I worked on this group exhibition and reached out to all these artists are kind of working in different parts of the world, right? So they were dispersed in different places. Alan Bosic actually was a student here. Isak Burbich, I think at the time, was working in New York. Zlatko still lives here in St. Louis. Shayla Kamerich was still in Sarajevo when we did this project. Margareta Kern had moved to London. Damir was living in, I believe in Sweden at the time. And Navoisha, I think, was also in New York. So they were all over the place. They all had different stories, different life experiences connected to the wars in the Balkans. And so the exhibition that Jeff and I did was exploring that through these different artists' work. And so at the time, I was the gallery director of the Hunt Gallery when Jeff and I did that show. We did other exhibitions. We did another really great show titled Bring Me a Lion, which I'll talk about. But I really liked doing that space because you could just do anything. You could have so much fun with it and just play and experiment and it was just a good space to do that because of the scale of it. You could just really think through different ideas and explore. So during that time, I was also doing a lot of independent curating. So this project I did at White Flag Projects, and this was kind of going back, is sort of a reflection of my experience of LA, like a visual experience of LA, and how artists could kind of represent how I remembered what things looked like there, right? So there was this kind of fascination with this like modernism, and a lot of the work in the show was like very fractured, right? Very dense with images, like that was part of the billboard. This piece over here, she was just doing like these little paper cutouts from images. So a lot of it was just like this fractured imagery that I was kind of trying to tap into. And yeah, it was just kind of like me trying to rationalize what my visual experience was of that city at that time and what was being made there at the time. So yeah, that was that exhibition. This is all kind of happening at the same time. I was also working at Ellen Curley Gallery as the assistant director there. And I did a lot of fun shows there too. Cause Ellen was so great, she just let us play, but it was also a commercial gallery. So we had to think about, it was a contemporary photography gallery. So anything we did really had to connect with photography or new media, video, film, things like that, just to try and further the mission of what she was trying to do with the gallery. So it was a commercial gallery, so her goal was to sell it, right? But she also gave us the opportunity, myself and Andy Wishmeyer, who was also a graduate of Webster, to kind of play and kind of flex some curatorial muscle there. So this project I did, kind of funny, but it's key to remember that I was also running the gallery here at Webster. So I had this idea, I was thinking a lot about all of this kind of observation, surveillance, voyeurism, and like just having like cameras being installed all over London when I was living there, and thinking about like, we're just being recorded all the time, whether we know it or not. Like some of us are, we just forget about it or wanna forget about it, but it's interesting because when I did this show, 2007, there wasn't really much of the YouTube happening, and like there wasn't Instagram or stuff like that, right? And to think about like this exhibition now, right? In a way, I felt like maybe I was channeling something where I had a lot of like, there was some conflict in like just presenting so much information all the time, and just connecting with people through the internet. So this show was, so I was running the gallery. I had the band Tone Rodent in lockdown at the Hunt Gallery playing music. Nobody could go in there. They were just playing music, and their image and the sound was sent back to Ellen Curley's downtown. So people were invited to come to Ellen Curley's to listen to the band and to interact with them. So the image you're seeing in the background is us asking for a song, having them play, talking to them through images. So nobody was watching their performance other than through the internet at Ellen's. So the whole idea kind of was based in this prison design called the Panopticon. It was designed by an architect, a British architect, Jeremy Bentham. And it's basically the circular design with one central tower. And that in that tower, there's basically that person can observe all of the prison cells. So I just thought of this idea of like, what must it be like to be in a situation like that, to just be observed all the time? So it was really about that. But it was also just like, what can we do that's different with this space? Like the space can be empty of objects. We can just have somebody play. And all of the images are then sent to another space. So that's kind of what that show was about. It was pretty fun. So this show, there was a space. It was an alternative space here run by artists called Boots. And they did some amazing projects. They also produced a zine. They did a lot of critical art writing in that magazine as well. It was more like a kind of a newspaper style thing, but it was such a great space. And again, they were just really wanting to make a mark on the art scene here and give artists opportunity to show their work, and again, to experiment, and give curators opportunities to do exhibitions. So so that was just a really important space at that time. I can't remember when they ended up closing, but it was just a kind of a moment in St. Louis that I was part of I'm sure there's been many since, and there will always be more, but this was kind of my moment of figuring out this curating thing. So, so this show, if you remember that MoTech show that I had up earlier, it was a little bit about this, like how can we go to an exhibition, look at video art, you know, and then kind of slip into this very singular experience. Like, let's just listen, right? I'll watch the video, but I'll have all these people around me. So I had actually identified, okay, who are the video artists I want to show? And then I worked with artist Brandon Anschultz, who's still based here in St. Louis, and John Watson, who was also a graduate of Webster and a sculpture professor here for a while. He's now living in Texas. But they designed the space and these objects, right? So these are the support structures for these videos. Like, how do we think about this? So really what it was about was like how their artwork could be a platform for viewing another artist's work. So I did that show at Boots here, and then it traveled, and it looked slightly different at this other space in Los Angeles after that. So we reinterpreted that, Brandon and John made different objects for that. So for the contemporary, this is a funny one. So this one, the contemporary at the time, they had a curator who was doing this thing called the front room, and she was kind of charged with curating this space. Maybe it's of artist's work, maybe you're working with another curator, or even another gallery or nonprofit space. And she would give them sort of free reign of this small area. The gallery is still there at the contemporary when you walk in. It's that small, kind of small gallery to the right when you walk into the space. But at that time, you know, she was just reaching out to basically all cultural producers in St. Louis and in the region to kind of take over the space. So my thought was like, I don't really have any like artists or objects I want to show. I kind of want to present the arts community back to itself, but do it through objects, right? Like and in this case, I just asked like, what's something from your personal collection you'd be willing to show? So it basically became an archive of these objects from different people in the arts community here. So I identified who those people were. This is the pictures. So I went around to all those people and I took their picture and I tried to make it look like a kind of a fraternity or sorority, kind of like here are all the graduating like seniors, or here's all the people in the Tri-Delta house or something, right? I wanted it to look like a collective of people, so I went around and took all their photos with Robin Asner this year at Webster. And this is what it turned into. So we went and we collected all their objects, and then Kim Humphreys and Sarah Colby brought their furniture in to kind of support that, right? So we hung things on the wall, they were books, that shelf there is actually a postcard, art postcard collection that somebody had been collecting over the years of like just artists sending them like postcards they had designed. And so we created this like sort of domestic space in there where people could come and just like look, or I think Jeff, you gave me the Jackson Pollock puzzle or something.
Jackson, yeah.
So that's there on the back. And just so many fun, weird objects that like help to give you a little bit of the personality or the interest of the people here. So it was a real mix of artists, curators. Emmy Pulitzer even was engaged in this. Like, I couldn't believe I managed to get her to give me something. Charlotte Eierman was the curator at SLAM at the time. Just so many different people with different perspectives, like different artists. Yeah, it was super fun. That was a fun project. So this, again, all this is kind of happening simultaneously. Yeah, so I was living in South City at the time, and with my partner at the time, and we were trying to think of like what can we do with this space? Like we don't really need all this space. We have to do like some sort of gallery or something. So we just wanted to do something creative with the space, because like we can't just go and rent something, right? So we're already renting our apartment, why don't we just do something in our apartment? So we came up with this object here, which is the gallery kit. It was a 9x9 space, just made of MDF and 2x4s, and on the inside it had some, that's the inside of it, we had some track lighting in there. And so yeah, it was just this kind of, basically this modular DIY object. Like we presented, like you could basically make this kit yourself if you wanted to, and build your own and have it in your own space. And it was just this thing we wanted to share, right? Here's another way to have an art space, right? To have a gallery. But one of the things that I wanted to really focus it, we can't just randomly do shows. We have to have a reason behind why we want to do this. What's the purpose? Like how do we want to think about this space? So I think one part of it was this kind of comment or engagement of, here's this public space within a private space. And it goes all the way back to that Matryoshka model, where we're thinking about, okay, we're asking the public to come into our house. This is our private space. So it was that balance, right, of this private public. We change the shows out every month, but the idea behind it had to be one singular object. It couldn't be an installation necessarily. It had to be one object. And the point behind that was really kind of going back to, at the time, whatever the data was on how long a person on average spends with an artwork. The point was to force people into a situation where they had to actually look at the work. And it was such an interesting psychological experiment, because when you force people into that situation and they go in there and that they only see the one thing, almost always did they come out, have a conversation, and go back in. Because it's almost like they felt like they had to, because they came all that way, they found our house, they're looking for this thing, and they're like, I better go back in there and take a look at that. So it was really about like having people like just focus for a minute on the object, on their experience, but also like, you're now sitting in our living room and you kind of have to talk to us. So it was just this fun kind of experiment. We really had a really great time with that. You know, it just like with all these shows that I've had up here so far, believe me, it's been such a roller coaster of response, right? If I didn't get 20 people to come to the opening, I felt like it was this failure. I put all this time and effort into something, but like it took me a little while to just like stop. Like I was having a hard time with that. Like, God, there's just no response. Nobody cares, right? But it just like ultimately I gave up on that, right? And the important part was that I was doing this curatorial research, right? I was trying to figure out different ways to be a creative curator. And in the end, that's really all that mattered. And that I was showing the work I thought was important. You know, these are artists whose work I respect, that I want to share with this community. And at that moment, I didn't care if 2 people came, right? It was like, I've done my due diligence. I've promoted it, you know, and even if 1 person came, I think that ultimately I think that met my goal for what that project was. So this piece on the right was a really interesting piece, the way that was made. It was a photograph that, I guess, I don't know a lot about the technical aspect of it, but basically, it disappeared. So once the light hit it, it took a while, but the image would disappear, right? And this artist, Phil Chang, was based in Los Angeles. And so we had this photo of this woman, and over the course of the 30 days or whatever of the exhibition, her image disappeared. So it was kind of this act of like you should come see the show before she disappears, kind of thing. So that was just, it was such a great illustration of the whole idea behind the isolation. And the weirdest part about all of this stuff when I look back is like, I don't know, like some prophetic thing, but like it all kind of is strangely connected to the COVID pandemic, but before it all happened, very weird. So just a couple more places where we did this gallery kit project. So we reached out to the Lent Brewery when we found out that there were people trying to access, mainly spelunkers, trying to access the basement of the Lent Brewery because there was a doorway in there that could lead you into the caves underneath. And so we found out about this space and we're like, we have to do an exhibition there. So we worked with this artist, Raqs McDonald, who's an Irish-born artist living in New York at the time. So he came to St. Louis and he went down to a few like caves and lakes and things around here in Missouri and did some film work. And that's the film you see projected inside the gallery kit. So we basically rebuilt the gallery kit in the basement of the Lent Brewery. And we tried to lock the door, but soon to find that the lock would get knocked off every day because somebody would be trying to access the caves. But we were just so worried about that expensive equipment down there. We didn't have a gallery attendant or anything, so we had to limit the hours just because of that. But the piece was really about like just being in this cave space, right? And his film was all this underwater footage from here, just around the region here in Missouri. Here's us doing the same project, but we built multiple kits at the Luminary when they were at a different space, and then worked with artists to activate those spaces. I'm gonna try to get through this. So then I had a curator she received a grant from CEC Arts Link. She was a curator, public art curator based in Baku, Azerbaijan. And she was given a grant, she came to Laumeier, she was doing research here in St. Louis about public art. And she was working for this space, Yayoi Contemporary Art. Well, she came to St. Louis, she was here for a while, she went back to Baku, she's like, I really wanna bring your project to Baku. I was like, cool, let's do it. So she found this space, basically what you're looking at is the gallery kit inside a brand new mall. So just like on the other side of where that woman is standing was like this big Chanel store. And it was just this like high-low conversation. It was amazing. But it was a really fun experience. So it's kind of this like, we're taking this like, you know, we're almost like transporting this box, right? Pretty much anywhere we were going. We did another project in New York. So I'm gonna just kind of walk through some things. So with Laumeier, so yeah, I think my position there has changed a lot over the years. When I first started at Laumeier, it really was just curating the exhibitions, right? We had exhibitions in what was the 1917 State House. Then over time, we did a capital campaign and built a new building, which is the Aronson Fine Arts Center. That opened in the fall of 2015. And so then we moved and we started doing exhibitions in that space. Over time, we had a collections manager for a while and a registrar. But I'm sharing this with you so you get a little bit more kind of input on the ways of museums and like who's who in the museum structure and organization. So I think it was 2016, we didn't renew a contract with the collections manager and registrar. My duties just got more complex because I had to be the curator of the exhibitions, work with the artists on the commissions, and I'll show you a few, but also care for the collection. I mean, curator literally translates to take care of, right? And so I then became the caretaker, but in a very physical way, not just like interpretation, but like, okay, I have to actually take care of these things now, because this is a collection that's held in the public trust, and I'm responsible for continuing these objects. And this one, for example, the Dan Graham. And I use this one as an example. I mean, it's a beautiful piece. It's a site-specific artwork. It was made during this program called 10 Sites. And it was such a great illustration of the partnership that Laumeier has with the St. Louis County Parks. And the St. Louis County Parks carpenters in these 10 Sites programs, the Beverly Pepper's one of them, the Mary Mist, the Jackie Ferraro, and there's a few others, of course, but some of them aren't on view anymore. That help to come and build these objects, these artworks with the artists. And so this work has been on view for quite a while, but inevitably things happen, right? Nature happens, people happen. Tom Huck, a local artist, he was so funny. I did a project with him, and he quickly found out, he's a printmaker, and he did this artwork with these writing. It's basically a little playground with these objects and their bugs. That's a whole nother story, but he said something really funny that I think sums it up. He's like, you know the problem with public art? The public. And that pretty much sums up my whole job there, I would say. Wrestling with not just nature, but people, right? So it really is engaging the community through art and nature, right? But from the job that I do, I have to think about both of those things have an influence on what I do, right? It can be conceptual, but it's also very real. So this work, unfortunately, the two-way mirror glass that's on that one side, it does break. So you have to order this stuff, and the only place they make it is Germany, right? So you're just met with so many challenges with objects and materials and how people interact with them. Are they safe? Working with engineers, and I'll talk about this in the workshop that we do afterwards. There's so many ways your studies here could go with the art world. So many opportunities like you haven't even thought of yet. I mean, there's somebody who just makes, lights for Dan Flavin, right? There's somebody who's just like thinking through the engineering of artist objects, like so many different ways. So this project, this was fun. I was, again, just trying to think a little bit, because Laumeier is one of those places where there's this perception that things don't change, and I was kind of leaning into that, like, perception a little bit, like, okay, well, it changes, because the nature changes, right? The environment changes, and we do change objects. Objects go away, for various reasons. They get returned to artists, or they're made of a material that can't last outside, or they're intentionally ephemeral objects. So this, I was like, all right, let's give people a little bit different experience of the space. Let's have them look at the objects through a different lens. So Dave Darrington, I don't know if he teaches here anymore, but he was teaching here at the time. And he was really doing a lot with Minecraft at the moment. At that time, he had some students that were kind of playing around with Minecraft, and he's like, I want to recreate the park in Minecraft. And it was just like so brilliant, because you like look at these things and you know that's Tony Tasset's eyeball, and you can see that's Vito Conchi's face of the earth, and he had so much fun, just building bricks to make these artworks. So now at the moment you can go through it's basically a virtual tour of the Minecraft Laumeier, right? It's on our website, you can go through it. But at the time, it was actually a game you could play. So him and his students made Laumeier, the landscape, into Minecraft, the game. So it was really fun. So that project was just about how artists are using just different technologies to make their work. It was really simple premise, but it was a Kranzberg exhibition series, so all of these artists are local. One of the artists did this. He was our composer in residence, Eric Hall, where he he's a DJ, sound artist, composer. He just knows everybody in St. Louis, and he knows all the bands, and he's either like produced their music or played with them or whatever. And he's like, can we do oral portraits of all the pieces in the collection? So he went out to all the people he knew, anybody in a band or another composer, sound artist. Can you make a sound piece about this object? And so now we have this kind of alternative kind of gallery or museum tour that's all done with sound. There's nobody telling you what the artwork is about. You're just listening to the music, and that person is kind of interpreting what they see through sound. So that, I mean, that was a real challenge, but it was really about, it's a testament to Eric, really. Like, he's got all these connections that he can actually be the curator of this thing. But the point is, like, you know, you see here on the right, there's the Mark de Suber piece. That piece hasn't moved in years, right? Like, it's probably not going to move for another 20, 50 years, who knows? But it's this static object that we can take that stigma off of it somehow, right? And that was one way to do that, through these sound portraits. This was another show co-curated with the director at the time, Mary Lou Canode. This was a project with a British artist. It was a big group show. It's called Camp Out, Finding Home in an Unstable World. And some of you may know the tree tent that we have out in the park now in the collection. It's by Dre Valkenaar that came into the collection at the time. But this was such a fun project because what he did, he's like, I just need a dumpster, and I need you guys to dumpster dive for me. Can you find like just discarded desks and like shelves and anything you can find that's wood? I'm gonna make a big hotel for the animals in the park with this. And so we filled that dumpster with twigs, sticks, you can see all the logs in there. And he basically created this architecture of the nature and these just basically trash, discarded like just wooden furniture. So that was part of that exhibition. How am I on time? I'll just kind of quickly go through this. These are the other couple of pieces we did. That was a performance by a British artist on the left. This is another exhibition we did titled Mound City, another group show. I don't know if I have time for this. Let me just show you a little clip of it. This was just such a fun thing. This basically DJ, collaborative. Let's see, where did it take me? How do I show this instead? Switch the screens, okay. Can't get this up. Right. That's okay. I'll show you this some more time. Okay. Oh, wait, okay, good. Anyways, they were great. They were this trio collaborative from Ottawa, First Nations, and this whole exhibition was really about connecting with our history, the Mississippian civilization in the mounds across the river. So we have remnants of that, right, in the Cahokia mounds and the surrounding mounds, mostly burial mounds, some ceremonial mounds. But the big one, the Monk's Mound, still stands. I like walking up that mound and looking back towards St. Louis and just thinking about that, the layers of history there. And you see the big landfill when you're looking out on the landscape there, and the landfill is keeps kind of filling up the space, and you're like thinking about, okay, the building earth, right, collecting earth from their perspective, and then how we collect earth. And then also kind of incorporated some historical documents that documented the destruction of the mounds on our side of the river. So we had mounds here in downtown St. Louis that were documented by a series of daguerreotypes by Thomas Easterly, and those pieces were in the show as well. this was actually, I was trying to find a way to get people to get the whole context and history, and we have such great resources for that. I'm not the expert on this civilization and the history and the reasons why they may have left this area, right? But these other places are, the historical site of Cahokia Mounds, the Missouri History Museum, the Art Museum, they all have objects that help tell that story. So I reached out to them and I said, could you be part of an extended checklist of this exhibition? I'd like to put an object label there at the museum that kind of opens up this conversation and this narrative a little bit. And basically it was like a scavenger hunt, kind of like, go to these other places. Don't just come to Laumeier and see the show. Go to these other places and see these other objects that influence these artists to make these works. Let me know when I should stop. It's 12:46. Let me see how many I have left. So I got Raqs, Gigi. Okay, I got quite a few things here. All right. Okay, I won't talk about all this. Okay, let me go through. Okay. I'll just kind of go through this one. I love this one because this is a group based in India, Raqs Media Collective, based in Delhi. They're curators, they're artists, they do everything, right? But they're socially engaged artists, right? They incorporate the community or a community into the production of their work. And it's very important to have the voice of people and the community in their work, and that's what this was. So one of the artists from the collective, Gigi, came to St. Louis, and anytime an artist comes, I was like, hey, just let me know where you want to go. I'll drive you there. Is there anything you're interested in? And if you don't know, I'll give you some recommendations. I'll take you there. So I took Gigi to the Missouri History Museum to see the 1904 World's Fair exhibition there. I think since it's been reinterpreted, but at the time he was just blown away by not only the 1904 World's Fair, but just like the exhibits we had, and just, he's like, wow, this is so interesting, these images, like the way that people experienced the fair at the time, and like us, like looking back on it now, like we kind of like shudder at some of the things they did. But he was like, okay, well, let me think of this idea of a fair, of an art fair, and then this idea of what is fair and World's Fair. So really playing a lot on this word. So at that time, we were invited to go to Expo Chicago to have a booth at Expo Chicago. And Raqs needed responses to make this work. So in our booth, we set up this kind of like, almost like a lemonade stand type thing. And we asked people for the response to their prompt, if the world is a fair place then. And we had them write it on cards, we collected them, we had about a little over 500 responses from people, from the art fair, which is the Expo Chicago, and that's the text that you see around these trees here. Mariko knows this work very well because she designed a catalog for it, but so these are all the responses, and they really range. Like some of them were very poetic, some of them were political, some of them were nonsensical, but it was all like it didn't matter to them. So they took from those 500 responses 30 of them, and we created these tree rings. And the tree rings are these kind of laser cut texts, right? And it was just, again, it was one of those things where it was important to like have the voice of the public in the work. And I think one part of, I guess, the history in India, and I'm really not an expert on it, but this was one story that really, I think was influencing them at the time, because we were a park and they were thinking about ways to have a conversation with nature. They were thinking about, I guess they were environmentalists in the kind of Uttar Pradesh region in India. And they were these women that were trying to save these trees, this forest, from being cut down, because I guess a developer wanted to come in and build something, right? and these women were trying to save the trees. So the rings themselves are like a promise ring to nature, to these trees, as a protector, as like a promise to take care of them. That being said, those rings are expandable. So we're like, no, we can't really choke these trees, right? Your work needs to be about protecting the trees. So there are these expanding things. So probably every year we open them up a little bit so we can let the trees breathe and we're not like killing any trees and, for their work. This was another artist I worked with from India. The piece is still there, that tower piece is still there. And that work, he was living in Delhi, and it was again about that kind of disappearance and migration and dispersal of people and thinking about what the suburbs are. And those are an architecture that was in downtown Delhi that had basically been wiped off the map, of people have been living in these structures for generations. So it was about that disappearance of people in architecture. This is another project I did with a Azeri artist, Fareed. Show I did about color. Fun piece. I'll show you this one because Noah's a professor here. This is cool. He's got the collaborative with his wife Allison. This work was part of Requiem exhibition series. These basically large megaphones, and there was a sound element on each end of those, and they had these bird songs being projected. I did this project with LA-based artist Sam Falls. The pieces are still here at Laumeier. What was great about his piece is there were two paintings in the show that he made on site at Laumeier with his pigment. And he layers, he basically branches anything he could find, layer them on the paintings, and then put the pigment on them and then take those away. So they were pictures of the landscape. The show with Mark Dion. That was a show that was curated by Storm King Art Center in New York. This is a project I did with Odili. We did this flag project. We still do the flag project, we just don't have one right now. That was a great project. Aida Šehović, ŠTO TE NEMA. This was I think, this really kicked off the idea of our visiting artist in residence because she was so connected to the Bosnian community, not just wanting to connect to the Bosnian community in St. Louis, but she, through this project, is connected to the diaspora. And this is a very important artwork for her. She's collected these filjan over the years, and essentially it represents the victims of this one massacre in Srebrenica. And it's a community project. It's also a way for her to connect with people, to make coffee, to have this connection through coffee, through objects. The show I did, this was just me wanting to do something about trees, because I just have like such a relationship with the trees at Laumeier. I wanted to have an homage to those trees. I did a show with Shin. Recently, Yayoi Kusama's Narcissus Garden. That was a great piece. Again, it was just a different way to utilize the space in the Heron Center, but to have like this important artwork, historical artwork here in St. Louis. Recent show with Ron Davis, who's also a graduate of Webster University. This project with Lincoln Clayton and Philander Lewis, they're based in Pittsburgh. Those were the kite pieces we did. This show just came down in May of Hugh Hayden, and our current exhibition with Monika Weiss. Please do come out and see that. It's a really great piece. Where there's an opportunity to come see her. She's doing a talk at 21C Museum and Hotel next Thursday, and then she's going to do another performance at the park in October. So please do come visit me. And I did not get to this, but I think I'm gonna talk about this with the workshop. I'm gonna keep that for that, because this is I could do a whole nother hour just on this conservation stuff. So I won't bore you with that right now, but anybody who has questions about it, or anybody who has questions for me at the moment, I think we have a couple minutes. Anything you saw, like pique your interest, more questions about how something was done, why it was done? Jeff, I knew you.
I know because that was great. It's not a question, but an observation. Because you started by talking about professional practices class and connections.
Mm-hmm.
And since I know the background, the amount of connections, I see Watson and Kevin, and that happened over the years
Yes.
is really, really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's the network and the building of that network. It's so important, and living in different cities too. Leading into that, there's a lot of Webster connections in that, right?
Yeah.
And just kind of perpetuating that relationship. But and it's just so important, as I think it's a reflection of what does community actually mean? What does it mean for you personally? And that community are those artists. I mean, the people that you saw, some of those are students that I went to school year with, right? And they were influences on me at the time, and they were only a year older than me. But I was talking about this earlier in the class. I was like, who's my competition? I loved having that competition. Those people were driving me to do things, right? And then eventually I just had to do it myself. But it was really about I'm an object organizer and presenter. Maybe I'm not a maker in that way.
And that the Tonnet, the other thing I picked up was the Tonnet room in Baku is maybe the best display of any works ever. It's so cool.
Yeah. I love that they had an open mind to give away some of that power they have as curators to artists to think about these just look like 18th century chairs to me, but not to Barbara Bloom. She's like, how can I do this through the filter of my own practice? I love that they just relegated that to them. I love they did that. And that I'll never forget that. That was really important. And then any way they were displaying art in Vienna too, I thought was fascinating. I hadn't seen before ways of showing objects, different ways of hanging objects, presenting objects. I love that. It wasn't just hey, we got a painting on the wall and a nicely colored painted room and some text,
I was just gonna say I really like sort of the difference in perspective between gallery curation and public art curation, where in some ways the gallery is freeing because it's a blank slate, and so you have this way to present art in a way that can be viewed really singularly. But I just really thought that comment about the issue with public art is the public you must have to curate so differently and think about the natural human inclination of curiosity and a want to touch and to climb and to interact with things like that.
I mean, it always fundamentally goes back to, I'm a human, I want to make my mark on something, right? You see it on the bottom of the arch, people carving their names, they have to make their mark, right? And it's funny to think about that, as an artist, it's that's all I'm doing, I'm just making my mark, But it's so funny to boil it down to such a basic thing, just making a mark.
Well, it's less of a question, more of a comment, but I just love the gallery kit. Are you still doing that?
No, I don't know. I mean, because it was a twofold thing, right? The gallery kit was it was this modular thing, right? So we gave away here, you make it yourself, go do a show, right? Put it up in your apartment or whatever. But it also was about the isolation. It was about a relationship of the viewer and an object. I don't know. I mean, maybe it could be resurrected in some way if somebody wanted to do it. Or maybe they made their own kit and they wanted me to come curate it or something. you know,
and I
don't
just,
know.
you know, I love the versatility of it, and I also think it's so good for students to see, it's like this self-imposed, not deadline, but you know, a venue, a DIY venue that you're taking really seriously.
Yeah.
It's in your home, and efforts and like continuing to do this, no matter, you know, where.
Yeah, no, it was like, I could find space anywhere, and that's really, I guess to sum it all up, it's really about just finding space. Anything else?
I guess I have one more question about the gallery kit, which I love the idea of that. Especially the one in your home. I'm just curious, like, how did you advertise that project? Like, did you have the first one, especially? Like, did you make posters? Did you have like?
Yeah,
I don't know,
all
like,
of
how did you
it,
get the
yeah.
work out?
We had critical mass at that time was such an important place for people to find, like, art stuff, right? We had some write-ups, we actually had a write-up in Art Forum on that project. I would email people. It was a lot of word of mouth too. But the key thing, and I think especially like if you're doing something locally, always try to have a local artist in the mix, right? Because they're the ones that are gonna bring people, and then they're gonna tell people, and like it's so important to work with local artists, because well, those are your peers, those are the people that you live and work with. But that helps too. There were times where like nobody would come. They're like, okay, nobody knows who Johannes Mondcipher is, even though he's a pretty well-known German artist, right? I guess nobody knows him. We like the work, so we're gonna show it. But yeah, so we would try everything. We did a catalog, we would do emails, and again, just word of mouth stuff like, hey, come over, so-and-so, we're showing this piece or whatever. And sometimes, like, I don't know that people were necessarily interested in the work, they just wanted to do something different or have a chat or, you know, just were curious about it. But yeah, it was real basic, cause I didn't do social media or anything like that, so, that's okay. So hopefully, yeah, that answered your question, but yeah, it was mostly word of mouth. Yeah. Probably do it totally differently now. And I don't think I would do it at all at my house. I have a young child. When you have a little kid, there's a safety issue there, so probably it wouldn't be the same.